Well, let's leave toddlers and let's move to the next time frame. These are 3 to 5-year-olds, and we now call these people preschoolers. There are 4 things that we look at, 4 aspects of their growth and development that we look at. We look at gross and fine motor skills. We still look at psychosocial emotional, as we did with the toddler. We look at language, and we look at visual acuity. So again, I want you to look at my chart, and I want you to realize that you should again look at this in a vertical manner. I want you to look at gross motor skills in a 3-year-old. They can jump, not very high. They throw a ball overhand. And my mental remembrance of a 3-year-old is that they can ride a tricycle, 3 wheels, 3 years old. That's their gross motor skills. That's what we expect them to accomplish. At 4 years of age, they don't just jump up and down, they can jump a short distance. They can balance for a couple of seconds on each foot. They can catch a bouncing ball. So they're becoming more and more developed with their gross motor skills. By 5 years of age, maybe kindergarten, they can hop. They can balance for 3 seconds on each foot. They can walk backward, toe to heel. They can somersault. So their physical development is really becoming refined. A 3 to 5-year-old, also called a preschooler, has developing fine motor skills as well. Their fine motor skills of a 3-year-old is that they can build a tower of 6 cubes. They can use scissors. If you draw a circle and ask them to copy it, they can do it. A 4-year-old copies a vertical line. Their tower can be now of 8 cubes. They can wriggle their thumbs because they have good fine motor movement, and they can dress and undress very, very easily. At 5 years of age, they should be able to draw a person, at least in 3 parts. They can copy a triangle, they can copy a plus sign, they can make a square, and a lot of 5-year-olds should be able to print their own name. With regard to psychosocial and emotional in a preschooler, at 3 years of age, they can put on their clothing. Their shirt might be back to front, and it probably won't match the bottom, but they can dress themselves. They can brush teeth with help, and so they're going to need the help of a caregiver for oral care. When we look at a 4-year-old, they can wash and dry their own hands. They can tell you the name of their friend, and they usually put a t-shirt on in the right manner. A 5-year-old can dress himself, and it ought to be done pretty well. They can play board games. They brush their teeth without help. This is often the time that a 5-year-old has an imaginary friend. So this is what we expect with psychosocial emotional in a preschooler. The final 2 things we look at are language and visual acuity. Let's look at language in a preschooler first. A 3-year-old is beginning to combine words. They can identify pictures. They can name at least 6 body parts. They can point to at least 4 pictures. And about 50% of a 3-year-old's speech should be understandable by someone who is not a family member or a close acquaintance. So 3 years old, about 50%. A 4-year-old, with regard to language, should know at least 2 actions like run, jump. They should be able to name a color. They should be able to use at least 2 objects. They can count a block. They should be able to name at least 4 pictures. They're 4 years old. A 5-year-old, though, with regard to language, is going to know more actions. All of their speech, 100% of the speech of a 5-year-old should be understandable. And their vocabulary is about 1,500 words. The last thing that we want to look at with a preschooler is a visual acuity. And here's how it goes. At 3 years of age, their visual acuity is about 20/50. Not that great. At 4 years of age, their visual acuity is about 20/40. It's getting better. By 5 years of age, their visual acuity is 20/30, but by 6 years of age, and you'll hear me say that in a minute, by 6 years of age, their vision ought to be 20/20. And in fact, let's talk about a 6-year-old, because a 6-year-old is now has a new name. Between 6 and 10 years of age, we use the term school age. Now we have new things to assess. With regard to gross and fine motor skills, we still assess those aspects. We still assess psychosocial and emotional, language, but we have 3 new things that we assess in a school-age child that we did not do before. One of those is cognitive, another is moral development, and the third new thing for you to assess is physical development. So let's take a look at them. I've put this in a chart for you because it's easy to see the progression as we go through the ages. So I want you to look at this chart in a vertical manner. With regard to gross motor skills in a 6-year-old, they should be able to balance on one foot for 6 seconds. They should be able to have good heel-to-toe walking, and they have good deliberate movements. An 8-year-old, though, should have increased physical strength and endurance. A 10-year-old is now capable of endurance activities, and a good example is something like bicycling. So you'll see an improvement in their gross motor skills as they age. What about fine motor? A 6-year-old can copy a square. They can draw a person with multiple parts. In an 8-year-old, we see much better hand-eye coordination and good finger control. A 10-year-old handles tools very well. Their manual dexterity is much improved over an earlier age. So again, fine motor skills improve dramatically with every 2 years in this age. What about psychosocial and emotional? A 6-year-old ought to be able to prepare cereal. They can identify the difference between left and right. They have some understanding of death and dying. And a 6-year-old wants to please a caregiver. A 6-year-old wants to please a teacher. An 8-year-old is very comfortable with the same gender friend. They enjoy group activities. They are now beginning to sense peer pressure, and they can be very impatient. A 10-year-old generally dislikes the opposite gender. Their best friends are same gender, and they generally are pretty dependable. You can send a 10-year-old to the neighbor's house with a cup of sugar, and you can rest assured that the 10-year-old will get it there. So with regard to language, a 6-year-old's vocabulary is now beginning to expand, and they understand what defining a word means. They can define probably 6 or 7 words. They know about adjectives. An 8-year-old is almost always able to converse with an adult at an adult level. They understand how opposites work, tall and short, big and little. A 10-year-old is continuing to improve their reading skills, but what really develops in a 10-year-old is their comprehension. So a 10-year-old's comprehension compared to an 8-year-old's is noticeably different. And then finally, with the school-age child, we're always looking at their cognitive abilities. A 6-year-old is easily disappointed. Their vocabulary, believe it or not, is about 10 to 14,000 words. And it's hard to imagine how many words that really is, but what you should take is that they converse, and they can converse very easily and readily with adults. Here's the big difference between an 8 and a 10-year-old with regard to cognition. An 8-year-old wants to understand how and why things work. A 10-year-old is able to understand why things work. So the difference is in desire and the actual ability to do that between an 8 and a 10-year-old. So the last 2 things that we look at in the school-age child are moral development and physical development. Let's look at moral development first. A 6-year-old understands bad. An 8-year-old understands bad as well, but is beginning to develop values. A 10-year-old clearly understands the difference between right and wrong. When we look at physical development in a 6-year-old, remember with regard to the eye, we said the visual acuity of a 6-year-old ought to be 20/20. Their tonsils and adenoids have reached their largest size. The eustachian tube is now longer and slanted, so we rarely see ear infections in 6-year-olds, and they're now beginning to get stronger. They're becoming more coordinated in their movements. An 8-year-old is now beginning to mature. Their bones are growing very rapidly, so you'll see growth in an 8-year-old. And then finally, in a 10-year-old, they're continuing with their growth, and girls may begin at 10 years of age to have some breast development. So there's something that bears a lot of discussion, or at least mention, and it's school-age obesity. According to the CDC in 2018, the obesity rate in school-age children, 6 to 10 years of age, is about 20%. And so we need to talk a little bit about that. If a child is obese during childhood, the risk of being an obese adolescent is very, very high. And an obese adolescent has almost a 100% chance of being an obese adult. Because so many diseases and cancers are associated with obesity, school age and earlier is a prime time for us to have an intervention and especially discussion with a parent or caregiver and the child. It's a time when you have a great opportunity to make a difference in the life of this child. So here's our last age group. It's adolescence. Adolescence usually occurs anywhere from about 10 to 11 years. It's about a decade long. It starts at 11 years of age and it goes all the way up to age 21. The assessment points for an adolescent are different than for a school-age child. So let's talk about them. What we look for are 4 specific things. We look for psychosocial emotional development, and there's a lot to look at. The second aspect of evaluating an adolescent's maturation is cognition. The third is their moral development. And finally, their physical development when we compare a male to a female. So let's look at adolescence. And once again, I've put the information for you in a chart. And it will be important for you to look at the chart in a vertical manner. With regard to psychosocial and emotional, there's a tremendous amount going on over the next 10 years during the life of an adolescent. As you remember, we divide adolescence into early adolescence, 11 to 14 years old, middle adolescence, 15 to 17, and then late adolescence, about 18 to 21 years of age. When we think about psychosocial and emotional assessment in an early adolescent, it's a time at which eating problems most often develop. So that's going to be an important part of your assessment. It also is a time at which their peers are their source for standards and models of behavior. So a lot of peer pressure begins to come in. In middle adolescence, their sex drive emerges. It's an important time to have those discussions with this age group. And they're also very prone during middle adolescence to feeling sad or depressed, which makes it an important time for us to begin to assess for depression, especially if there's a family history. The third age group is late adolescence. This is where they are beginning and they have begun to mature. They often set goals and they begin to follow through. So a tremendous amount going on in psychosocial and emotional. What about cognitive? In an early adolescent, they want to learn useful things. They're not interested in others. They want to focus on the present, not in the future. A middle adolescent, this time of cognition is where they begin to develop intimate relationships. And so we often see undesirable or undesired pregnancy in this age of middle adolescence. In late adolescence, there's a higher level and concern for the future. They're now beginning to think ahead of time and not just in the present. With regard to moral development, in an early adolescent is going to test rules and push limits. They begin to understand the consequences of future behavior, but it also is a time at which they're very comfortable experimenting with drugs or sex or alcohol or tobacco, which means it's an important time for you to have a discussion with regard to anticipatory guidance in early adolescence. Well, what about moral development in a middle adolescent? A middle adolescent clearly understands the concept of good and of evil. During late adolescence, they're more likely to delay gratification. They have personal dignity and they have a continued interest in moral reasoning. What about, and this is our final one, physical development? We compare male physical development and female physical development, and it's quite different. With male physical development in early adolescence, this is a period at which there is rapid height gains. In other words, they grow vertically, 10 centimeters per year for a male. They begin to have a ravenous appetite. They begin to have body proportions that are similar to an adult. In middle adolescence, they're nearing the completion of their vertical growth. They may have acne, they probably have body odor, and they're able to go through excessive physical activity, followed by a period of lethargy where they may sleep and they're so tired after they've done a lot of physical activity. And then finally, in late adolescence, for a male, they continue to gain weight, they continue to gain muscle mass, and also body hair. That completes physical development for a male. In a female who is an early adolescent, remember 11 to 14 years of age, a female has increased coordination and strength. They also are having a period of rapid vertical growth, and their body proportions are similar to an adult female. During middle adolescence, the female has completed or nearly completed her vertical growth. And an important time frame for you to remember is this. During middle adolescence, she will have height completion stop. So she'll have a completion of her vertical growth about 2 to 2.5 years after she has begun menses. She, just like her male counterpart, commonly has acne and also body odor during middle adolescence. And then finally, in late adolescence, a female is completely developed. So this represents physical development of both males and females. Well, we've reached the end of growth and development for newborns through late adolescence. I hope this was helpful for you. I look forward to presenting additional pediatric content for you in subsequent videos. I'll see you then.